If someone had told me 6 months ago that I would be here in my own kitchen, watching the morning light catch the dust motes dancing around Julian Vance's head, I would have prescribed them a strong sedative and a long vacation. Julian Vance in my kitchen. The thought alone was a violation of several fundamental laws of my universe. He was a creature of the 40th floor, of halogen lights, and the aggressive scent of expensive cologne. My world was the 7th floor, the scent of lukewarm coffee, and the quiet hum of a computer processing data no one but me understood. We were different species, occupying different ecosystems that just happened to be connected by an elevator. My life was a fortress built of routine. Each day, a perfect replica of the last. Same alarm time. Same 2 spoonfuls of sugar in my coffee. Same route to the train station, time to the second. This predictability was my armor. It kept the chaos of the world at bay, the messy, unpredictable tangle of human emotion. Inside my fortress, I was safe. I was an observer, a chronicler of the world from a safe distance. And my primary subject of observation for the better part of 3 years had been Julian. He was impossible not to watch. He moved through the office like a shark patrolling its territory. All sleek lines, controlled power, and an unnerving stillness that promised sudden, decisive action. He was a senior project manager, a title that seemed too small for the sheer force of his presence. People orbited him. His laugh, a rare and startlingly deep sound, could cut through the office drone like a thunderclap. His frustration, a low growl directed at a malfunctioning conference phone, could make an entire department flinch in unison. I cataloged him meticulously. The way he'd pinch the bridge of his nose when a deadline was tight, leaving a faint red mark. The slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his head when he was genuinely listening to someone, a crack in the formidable facade. The way his tailored shirts strained just so across his shoulders when he reached for something on a high shelf. These were my data points. Benign, distant observations that felt safe because he was so thoroughly unattainable. He was a concept, a collection of traits and habits. Not a man, never a real man. The distance between us was more than just the 30 feet of industrial-grade carpeting separating our desks. It was a chasm of hierarchy and temperament. He was a man of action, of loud phone calls and declarative statements. I was a man of quiet analysis, of spreadsheets, and carefully worded emails. He probably didn't even know my last name. I was just the analyst from 7, a necessary but forgettable cog in the corporate machine he so effortlessly commanded. This was the status quo. Him, a distant, burning star. Me, a forgotten satellite, content to chart his course from the cold, safe darkness. And then came the Odyssey Project. It was the kind of project that earned its grandiose name. A company-wide systems overhaul that had been the stuff of legends and nightmares for over a year. It was Julian's baby. He'd conceived it, championed it, and was now tasked with ramming it through to completion. My role was minor, a tiny tributary feeding into his vast river. I handled the legacy data migration analysis, a tedious but critical piece of the puzzle. The disruption came, as they always do, in the form of an email from on high. An email with a subject line in all caps, which was never a good sign. The final deadline had been moved up, not by a day or two, by a full week. A collective groan echoed through the office. The quiet, predictable hum of my life was replaced by a frantic, high-pitched ringing in my ears. The fortress walls had been breached. The next few days were a blur of caffeine and cortisol. My neat routine shattered. I ate lunch at my desk. My dreams were filled with scrolling lines of code, and the sun became a distant rumor. The office transformed from a place of quiet order into a humming, panicked hive. And at the center of it all, a vortex of controlled chaos, was Julian. He didn't seem asleep. He was a constant presence, striding between conference rooms, his voice a low, urgent hum, a phone perpetually pressed to his ear. On the final night, the hive had mostly emptied. The worker bees had retreated, exhausted, leaving only the desperate few. By 10 post-meridium, it was down to a skeleton crew. By midnight, it was just the two of us. Him, in a glass-walled conference room, surrounded by whiteboards covered in frantic scrawls. Me, at my desk, running the final diagnostic on the data annex. A storm had been threatening all evening, and now it broke with biblical fury. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. A flicker. The lights buzzed, dimmed, and then died. We were plunged into an absolute, disorienting darkness, broken only by the faint glow of our laptop screens and the jagged flashes of lightning that illuminated the city skyline in stark, terrifying relief. The building's emergency lights flickered on a moment later, casting the empty office in a sickly, greenish glow. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. A notification popped up on my screen. Network connection lost, of course. And then another from the City Transit Authority. All trains suspended due to track flooding. I was trapped. Here, with him. The fortress was gone. I was out in the open, and the apex predator was just a few yards away. Forced proximity. That's what this was. A cruel joke played by the universe. I could hear him swear, a low, guttural sound from the conference room. The door slid open, and he emerged, silhouetted against the emergency lighting. He looked less like a shark and more like a soldier surveying a battlefield. "Everything's down," he stated. It wasn't a question. "The main server's not responding." I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. The storm must have hit a substation. The backup generator is running building systems, but the dedicated server farm has its own power grid. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure exhaustion that I had never seen before. It made him look human. His tie was gone. The top two buttons of his crisp white shirt were undone, revealing the strong column of his throat. The perfect, invincible facade had cracks all over it. "We have to upload this report by 6 in the morning," he said, his voice raw. There is no alternative. He walked towards my desk, his footsteps unnervingly loud in the echoing silence. He smelled of coffee and rain and something else, something uniquely him. He leaned over my shoulder to look at my screen, and I forgot how to breathe. His proximity was a physical force, a gravitational pull that warped the space around me. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I found myself observing him not from a distance, but from mere inches. I could see the fine lines of fatigue around his eyes. A faint stubble was beginning to shadow his sharp jawline. And there it was, a detail I'd never seen from across the office. A small, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection in the otherwise flawless canvas of his face. I wondered, inanely, how he'd gotten it. A childhood fall? A fight? His hands were braced on my desk, on either side of my keyboard. They were large, capable hands. Not the smooth, manicured hands of an executive, but the hands of someone who did things. The nails were clean, but short, the knuckles prominent. Calluses on his palms. It was a strange, intimate detail that felt like a secret I shouldn't know. "Is there any other way?" he asked, his voice low, close to my ear. I flinched. My mind, usually a well-oiled machine of logic, was sputtering. I forced myself to focus on the problem. The technical problem, not the 6'2", impossibly handsome and deeply stressful problem standing next to me. There's an old direct access protocol. I heard myself say, my voice sounding thin and reedy. It bypasses the main network. It's archaic, but it might work. We'd have to go down to the sub-level server room. He straightened up, and I could breathe again. Lead the way. The walk to the service elevator was surreal. The empty office, bathed in green light, felt like a sunken ship. Our footsteps echoed. We didn't speak. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was charged, humming with unspoken tension and the thrum of the storm outside. In the elevator, the space was even smaller. I was hyper-aware of him, of the way his shoulder almost brushed mine, of the sheer amount of space he occupied. I stared at the floor numbers as they descended, focusing on the tiny red lights as if they were a lifeline. The server room was cold and loud, a cavern of humming machines and blinking LEDs. It smelled of ozone and chilled air. We found the terminal I was looking for in a dusty corner. I pulled up a command line interface, the stark black screen and green text, a comforting familiarity in a night that was anything but. "Okay," I said, my confidence returning now that I was in my element. I need to physically connect this access port to the core server rack. The cable should be in that cabinet. He moved to the metal cabinet and pulled it open. I was typing, my fingers flying across the keyboard, inputting the authorization codes from memory. He found a thick, coiled cable and turned back towards me. At the same moment, I pivoted in my chair to point out the correct server rack. We were a tangle of miscoordinated movement. He stumbled on a loose floor tile, lurching forward. His hand shot out to steady himself, landing squarely on my shoulder. It was the first time he had ever touched me. A shock pure and simple. Not a spark, not a tingle. A full-body jolt, as if I had touched a live wire. Heat flooded the point of contact, spreading down my arm, up my neck, across my chest. My entire nervous system lit up. My thoughts scattered. All the data points, all the careful observations, all the safe distance, it all vaporized in an instant. This was not a concept. This was a man, and his hand was on my shoulder, and my heart was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. He righted himself immediately, pulling his hand back as if he'd been burned. Sorry, he muttered, his voice rough. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I couldn't form a word. I just nodded, turning back to the screen, my hands trembling slightly. I could still feel the weight of his hand, the phantom pressure burning through the fabric of my shirt. The air was thick with the unspoken. The accidental touch hung between us, a physical presence in the cold room. I took a deep, shaky breath and forced my fingers to move. The rack is over there. Port 7 beta. He moved to do as I said, his movements stiff. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by a careful, almost hesitant awareness. The dynamic had shifted. Here in this cold, humming room, I was the one with the knowledge. I was the one in control. The great Julian Vance, commander of boardrooms and conqueror of projects, was looking to me for guidance. He needed my help. He struggled to connect the heavy cable into the densely packed port. He was used to giving orders, not fumbling with hardware in a dark room. It's not fitting, he said, his voice tight with frustration. I stood up and went over to him, my body moving on autopilot. I was still reeling from the touch, but a deeper instinct, the need to solve the problem, took over. I reached past him, my arm brushing his. Another jolt. I ignored it. You have to align the pins, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Here, let me. I took the cable from his hand. Our fingers brushed. This time it was longer, a sustained contact. Skin on skin. His fingers were warm, the calluses rough against my own. I felt a dizzying rush, a sense of vertigo. I focused on the task, my world narrowing to the metal plug and the port. I guided it in, and it clicked satisfyingly into place. Done, I said, stepping back, creating space. I needed space. He was watching me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. The arrogance was gone. The impatience was gone. He just looked tired. And something else. Something I couldn't name. Thank you, he said. And it sounded genuine. Not the clipped, perfunctory thanks of a superior, but the real thing. We finished the upload in near silence. The only sounds the clacking of my keyboard and the hum of the servers. He stood behind me, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen. I was intensely aware of his presence, of every breath he took. The air was electric. The fortress was a pile of rubble around my feet. When the final upload complete message appeared, a wave of relief so profound it was almost painful washed over me. It was 4:37 in the morning. We had done it. We rode the elevator back up to the 40th floor. The storm had passed. Through the massive windows, the first hints of dawn were painting the eastern sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. The city was quiet, sleeping. It felt like we were the only two people awake in the world. He went to the small kitchenette and returned with 2 mugs of what was probably the worst coffee in the entire city. He handed one to me. Our fingers brushed again. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. It was a question, an acknowledgement. We stood by the window, watching the sun begin to rise. The sterile office was transformed by the soft morning light. The sharp edges softened, the glass and steel warmed. It was almost beautiful. I couldn't have done that without you, he said, his voice quiet. He wasn't looking at me, but at the skyline. It's my job. I replied, the automatic, self-deprecating response leaping to my lips. No, he said, turning to face me. His eyes, which I'd always thought of as a cold, intimidating gray, were complex. There were flecks of green in them, visible now in the gentle light. That wasn't your job. You saved this project. You saved me. I didn't know what to say. The silence stretched, but it was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of exhaustion and relief and this strange, terrifying intimacy that had bloomed between us in the dark. Why are you always so quiet, Leo? He asked, his voice soft. He used my name, my first name. I wasn't sure he even knew it. The question caught me off guard. It was too direct, too personal. The truth felt like a dangerous, fragile thing. But the night had stripped away all my defenses. My armor was gone. I don't know, I stammered. I guess. I'm not good with people. You're not good with people? He gave a short, humorless laugh. You command a room full of servers like a goddamn general. You had me, the supposed project lead, following your orders without question. That's different, I said, looking down into my mug. That's logic. Systems. It makes sense. People don't. I risked a glance at him. People like you don't, his brow furrowed. People like me? The confession tumbled out of me, then, a torrent of words I had held back for years. You're confident. You take up space. When you walk into a room, everyone feels it. People like me, we just try to get out of the way. It's easier to be quiet, to observe. It's safer. He was silent for a long moment, studying my face. I felt completely exposed, like I had just peeled back my skin to show him the frantic, terrified wiring underneath. I expected him to laugh or to look at me with pity. Instead, he took a step closer. The space between us dwindled until I could feel the warmth of his body again. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate Morse code. Danger, danger, danger. Do you know what I thought? He said, his voice barely a whisper. I thought you hated me. I'd see you across the office, always watching. Your expression was always so serious. I thought I'd done something to offend you. That my being a loud, arrogant bastard had pissed off the one person whose work I actually admired. My brain short-circuited. He admired my work? He had noticed me watching? He thought I hated him? The world tilted on its axis. Everything I thought I knew was wrong. I don't hate you, I whispered, the words feeling impossibly large in my throat. I was intimidated. Good, he said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. Because I was intimidated by you too. He lifted his hand, the one with the calluses, and gently, hesitantly, tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers were warm against my skin. It was the most deliberate, most terrifyingly gentle touch I had ever felt. It wasn't an accident this time. It was a choice. My breath hitched. I'm standing here. He's touching my face. This is not a dream. He didn't pull his hand away. He let it rest against the side of my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. His gaze dropped from my eyes to my lips. The air crackled. The entire world, the entire sprawling city below us, faded away until there was only this small, sacred space between us. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stop him, to retreat back into my fortress. His eyes were asking a question. My body answered for me, leaning in his touch, my own eyes fluttering closed. And then his lips were on mine. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss like in the movies. It was slow. It was hesitant. It was questioning. It was soft and warm and tasted faintly of stale coffee. It was the most honest thing I had ever experienced. It was a conversation without words, a confession of 1,000 unspoken things. The loneliness, the longing, the fear. It was all there in the gentle pressure of his mouth against mine. I brought my own trembling hand up to his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. It was just as frantic as my own. The great Julian Vance, the unshakable titan of the 40th floor, was just as terrified as I was. The kiss ended as gently as it began. He pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against mine. We stood there for a timeless moment, breathing the same air, our hearts beating a frantic, synchronized rhythm. The rising sun flooded the office with golden light, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was in the dark. The spell shattered with the ping of the first elevator arriving. The start of the workday. The return of the real world. Julian pulled away abruptly, the warmth vanishing. He took a full step back, putting a chasm of space between us. He ran a hand over his face, and when he looked at me again, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by a mask of cool professionalism. The walls were back up, higher and thicker than before. "Good work last night, Leo," he said. His voice was clipped, formal. The man who had kissed me seconds ago was gone, replaced by the senior project manager. He turned, grabbed his briefcase from the conference room, and walked towards the elevators without a backward glance. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say anything else. He just left. I stood there, frozen by the window, as the morning sun climbed higher. I felt the phantom pressure of his lips on mine, the ghost of his hand on my face. My stomach was a churning knot of bees. My mind, a frantic, looping reel of the last few hours. The touch, the confession, the kiss, the abrupt departure. I woke up alone. Metaphorically, of course. I was always alone, but this was a new kind of alone. A deeper, more hollowed-out version. Before, my solitude was a comfortable blanket. Now, it was a gaping wound defined by the sharp, painful absence of him. A spiral of doubt began, coiling in my gut. It was a mistake, a stress-induced hallucination, a moment of weakness for both of us, brought on by exhaustion and the strange intimacy of the storm. He regretted it. That was the only possible explanation for his cold retreat. He was embarrassed. He was probably straight. What had I been thinking? He was just being kind, and I had misinterpreted everything, forcing him into a situation he couldn't escape without being cruel. The self-recrimination was a physical assault. I felt sick. I had shattered the status quo, the safe distance I had so carefully maintained. I had traded my secure, predictable solitude for a single moment of impossible connection, and now I had neither. I was adrift. I went home, showered, and came back to the office, a zombie running on autopilot. The fortress of my routine was the only thing I could cling to. The office was buzzing with the success of the Odyssey project. People were congratulating me, clapping me on the shoulder. It all felt like it was happening to someone else, seen through a thick pane of glass. I saw him across the floor. He was holding court, surrounded by his team, looking every bit the conquering hero. He was laughing that deep laugh. He looked rested, confident, completely unaffected. He glanced in my direction once, his eyes sweeping past me as if I were a piece of furniture. A ghost. The period of silence began. It was a tangible thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket laid over the office. We communicated only through project-related emails. His were terse, professional, stripped of any personality. "Please see attached, THX." Each one was a small, sharp jab to my already bruised heart. My old solitude returned, but it was tainted now. My desk, once my sanctuary, felt like a prison cell. The quiet of my apartment was no longer peaceful. It was deafening. It echoed with the memory of his voice, his touch. The absence of him was a constant, aching presence. I replayed every second of that night. The way he looked in the dim light. The feel of his hand on my shoulder. The taste of his kiss. Was it all in my head? Had I imagined the tenderness, the fear in his eyes? 2 days passed like this. 2 centuries. I was a wreck. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus. My carefully constructed world was in ruins, and I had no idea how to rebuild it. I decided on the 3rd day that I had to accept it. It was a one-time aberration. I would go back to being the quiet analyst. I would rebuild my fortress, brick by painful brick. I would forget his kiss. I would forget the flecks of green in his eyes. I would forget his name. I was packing my bag at the end of the day, my shoulders slumped in defeat, ready to retreat to the hollow comfort of my apartment. I was resigned to it. This was my life. Alone. Safe. Empty. Leo, his voice. Low and close behind me. I froze, my hand hovering over my keyboard. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. "Can we talk?" he asked. The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. There was no arrogance in his tone, only a deep, ragged weariness. He sounded like I felt. I finally turned to face him. He looked terrible. The confident swagger was gone. There were dark circles under his eyes, and the lines of tension around his mouth were deeper than I'd ever seen them. He wasn't the conquering hero. He was just a man, and he looked just as lost and haunted as I was. I gave a single, jerky nod. We went to a small, soulless coffee shop in the building's lobby. It was nearly empty. We sat at a tiny table in the corner, the silence between us stretching taut. He stared into his cup as if it held the answers to the universe. "I'm sorry," he finally said, the words rough, as if they had to fight their way out. "For how I acted. For just leaving." I waited, my heart a painful, hopeful knot in my chest. He looked up, and his eyes were raw with an emotion I couldn't decipher. "I panicked, Leo. That's the honest truth. I completely and utterly panicked." He let out a harsh breath. "Nothing like that has ever happened to me before. I've never felt that way. Not with anyone." He looked down at his large hands, which were clenched on the table. "My whole life has been a straight line. School, military, this career. Everything planned. Everything controlled. And then that night. You. It was like a lightning strike. It didn't fit into any of my plans. It scared the hell out of me, the clarifying conversation. The honest words I had been so desperate to hear. He wasn't repulsed. He was scared. I was scared of what it meant," he continued, his voice low. "I was scared of what people here would think. I was scared of messing it up, of ruining the one good, real thing that's happened to me in years." He met my gaze, and his was filled with a desperate sincerity. "So I did what I always do when I'm scared. I ran. I put up walls. And these last 2 days sitting in that office, feeling you on the other side of that wall, it's been the worst 2 days of my life. A single traitorous tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away. I thought you regretted it," I whispered. "I thought it was a mistake." "No," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. The contact was electric, just as it had been the first time. A lifeline. "No, Leo, it wasn't a mistake. Running away from you was the mistake." We sat there, our hands clasped on the table, the sterile coffee shop transformed into a sanctuary. We talked. We really talked. He told me about the pressure he felt, the golden boy image he had to maintain. I told him about my fortress of solitude, about the fear that had kept me locked inside it for so long. We acknowledged that this new emotional territory was terrifying, but we also acknowledged that we wanted to explore it together. As we left the coffee shop and walked out into the cool evening air of the city, he didn't let go of my hand. He just kept holding it. His fingers laced through mine. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic gesture. It was quiet. It was simple. But walking down that busy street, with the crowds of people rushing past us, his hand holding mine was the boldest, most significant act I could imagine. It was a public declaration, a symbolic gesture, a promise that he wasn't going to run again. My life did not change overnight. There was no grand cinematic sweep of music. But everything was different. The change was quiet, incremental. It started with him walking me to my train station that evening. Then it became a shared coffee in the morning before work. Then lunch, away from the prying eyes of the office, in a small park a few blocks away. The office itself became a strange stage for our silent play. We were still the senior project manager and the quiet analyst. But now, there were stolen glances across the room that held a shared secret. A slight smile from him that was just for me. An email from me with a dry, witty comment hidden in the technical jargon that I knew would make him laugh. The distance was still there, physically, but the chasm had been bridged. A few weeks later, after a quiet dinner at a restaurant far from our usual haunts, he came back to my apartment. My small, solitary space. He walked in and looked around at my neat stacks of books, my single coffee mug by the sink, the overwhelming sense of a life lived for one. He didn't seem to judge it. He just seemed to see it, to see me. That night, he stayed. And when I woke up the next morning, he was still there. The morning light was filtering through my blinds, catching the dust motes dancing around his head as he slept. And I didn't feel the familiar stab of morning after anxiety. There was no fear, no spiral of doubt. There was only a profound, bone-deep sense of peace. The gaping wound of my solitude had been filled. Our new beginning was forged in these small moments of domestic intimacy. Making coffee together in my tiny kitchen, bumping elbows, moving around each other in an easy, unspoken dance. His tie, a slash of expensive silk, draped over the back of my worn armchair. The sound of his shower mixing with the sizzle of eggs in a pan. These were the mundane, beautiful routines of a shared life. He made terrible coffee. He always used too much water, but I drank it every morning. He stole the blankets, his larger frame a furnace against my back in the cool of the night. I never slept better. My fortress was gone, my armor dismantled, and I had never felt safer. The disruption I had feared my entire life, the chaos I had so carefully avoided, had turned out to be my salvation. Julian Vance, the intimidating titan I had observed from safe distance, was now just Julian. The man who left his socks on the floor and hummed off-key when he was concentrating. The man who looked at me, really looked at me, like I was the only person in the world. I once built my life around the predictable, the logical, the things that made sense. I had a variable for everything, a protocol for every outcome. But there was no spreadsheet that could have predicted this. There was no algorithm that could have calculated the trajectory from a shared, stressful night at the office to a quiet, shared morning in my kitchen. He was the plot twist I never saw coming. The beautiful, chaotic, wonderful disruption that tore down my walls and showed me what it truly meant to live, not just to observe. My life was no longer a solo expedition. It was a journey of two, and for the first time, I was not afraid of the destination.